Welcome to the Innovation Race podcast, where we meet fascinating inventors, innovators, politicians, and leaders who share the view that what's best for our country is to protect patents and keep innovation in America. Now, here's your host, Jenny Beth Martin.
Declan Ganley is an English-born Irish entrepreneur, businessman, political activist, and telecom CEO. Declan was awarded the Louisiana Distinguished Service Medal for his and Rivada's, his telecom company's, life-saving actions establishing communication capabilities for emergency responders in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Declan is fascinating and has a lot to say about the issues in our film Innovation Race. Innovation Race is available to watch on salemnow.com, so please visit salemnow.com and share the movie with your friends so all Americans can learn about how important innovation is to our economy and our national security. I hope you enjoy our conversation with Declan Ganley. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You actually have invented things and have a patent. Tell us a little bit about your invention.
Well, with multiple patents, Rivada Networks is in the wireless technology business. We have developed a lot of technology in the 5G space and what's coming next. We've built operating systems, trial systems, experimental systems. We've been deploying wireless networks in one form or another since 2005. First big response we did in the US was for NORAD, US Northern Command, for Hurricane Katrina. In the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, very proud to say our team got a medal for it. We got paid for it. And that was deploying new technology at the time, which worked very successfully. And we've, as we're a US company, we've really been at the cutting edge of developing new wireless technologies for quite a long time now, and we've got a lot of patents in this space. Not just in the US, but around the world. And so building and developing these new systems, sort of coming up with what's going to come next in wireless is very important to us. We've also got global satellite spectrum, and we are currently planning to deploy a 600 satellite mega constellation in low Earth orbit over the course of the next 3 years. And we've got from the ITU, which is part of the UN, an allocation of some of the highest priority spectrum for that purpose in the world. It's even above Musk's Starlink. It's above Bezos's Kuiper constellation. So we're very excited about that.
Well, it is exciting technology. And when you say you're inventing the things that will come next, I think that it's hard for people to imagine when they're looking at a phone and they see the new things that come out every day. It's hard to imagine truly what is coming next. Like imagining and understanding what the Internet of Things has the potential to bring to us is like going from a dial tone to a touch tone, or a touch tone to a cellular phone almost. And
of course this patents sit in the middle of all of this, right?
Right.
But in fact, I'd say to you, I've been in the wireless business since the early 1990s, actually, but set up Rivada in 2004, 2005. We'd be a lot further down the road were it not for regulatory capture. And we've seen regulatory capture at work. And I know in the movie you described very well, you talk about crony corporatism. And crony corporatism is a practice exercised by predatory, monopolistic types of businesses who don't innovate anymore, who seek to pull up the drawbridge, build barriers, and stop innovators from being able to compete with them. And in America, we've particularly seen that in the wireless space. So at the moment, we're at about 1.3 mobile wireless devices per capita. Mm-hmm. We should already be at over 100. Now, that doesn't mean everybody's going to have 100 smartphones in their pocket, but there is no Internet of Things unless the average price of a gigabit comes down exponentially. And when you have a cartel of 3 carriers that are setting an artificially high price and doing everything they can to make sure that price doesn't come down too quickly, we've seen really a suppression of American innovation and America's ability to define what the next great sort of moves will be in the wireless economy. So America is all of the free world, America's the largest single market that's got one regulator in it. So it's the FCC in the US. In Europe, you've got 28 regulators. Okay. It's a big market, but it's a much more, it's not as smooth a system, whereas the US offers the biggest market. So if innovation isn't taking place in America, which has got the economies of scale to bring inventions to market and to build that criticality, profitability, and everything else, if it's not happening in the US, it's much more difficult for it to happen somewhere else in the free world. And we've seen crony corporatism. We've produced things like the PTAB. Frankly, that is a classic product of regulatory capture. How can we remove rights enshrined in the Constitution of the United States, right, take them out of the judicial branch and move them over to some might say kangaroo court. I mean, that's not going to make me very popular, and I wouldn't say that. But
I'll say it. Kangaroo court.
that is there to because it's got some sort of expertise that courts don't have. And we see this in other countries. I mean, you go to a place like Mexico and they have telecom courts. I mean, it's an exaggeration to say they have ice cream courts, but I wouldn't be surprised to see them appear, where you have these sort of things of, well, the riffraff won't understand. A jury won't understand these issues.
They just don't know enough. You have to have these experts.
Exactly. And this is nonsense. And regulatory capture produces these outcomes. And you speak very well in the movie about who ends up exploiting and using the PTAB. We were sold a pup when we were told it was for the little guy. How many little guys appear before that thing?
Well, a lot do, but they all don't benefit from it.
Right.
By and large, they get crushed.
Well, that's why. How many win?
Right, hardly any.
And it's the perfect mechanism for the exercise of lawfare against small inventors. It also undermines the U.S. patent system, and it makes places like China more attractive than they otherwise would be for people to go and patent things there. And I talk in the movie about the fact that China is trying to out-America where these patents are concerned. But regulatory capture is the weapon used by crony corporatists to suppress and crush upstart competition. It's why we see less public companies being filed in the U.S., stock markets than we did in the 1990s. It's why we see America with some of the highest cellular prices, consumer prices in the world. In America, it should be the cheapest. It's the most expensive. That's taking money out of the pockets of every single American. Every American household budget is paying probably more than, well, a lot more than double what they should be paying for cell phone service. And, if you want to talk about a progressive taxation system or whatever, that extra money that a family that's barely making it is paying in cell phone bills every month, that's a week's shopping in some cases. This really makes a difference. We ran the numbers on this about 3 or 4 years ago. Now, granted, the figures have changed a bit since then. But if you reduced at that point US cell phone prices, service prices, to where just the UK is, and the UK is by no means exemplary, but to just where England is, it would be the equivalent of a $1 trillion tax cut in the US economy.
Wow.
And you wouldn't need Congress for it. That's what crony corporatism and cartels do, and they end up, through exercising regulatory capture, creating a regulatory state that reflects them and what's important to them and protects them against the interests of the overall economy.
And the small people who are just starting out, who are emerging or have new technology or new corporations or can be better at what they do than the big guy. For whatever reason, they figured out this is a weakness with the big guy and we're going to provide better service or whatever it might be, they can start competing. But as soon as they look like they're going to get any traction, those regulations wind up kicking in for whatever it might be. You can be a little tiny company and they don't care. They think you're like a gnat.
Very well put.
But once you start growing...
Well, I'll give you an example of what you're absolutely spot on. So I'll give you an example of what you're talking about, of which I have firsthand experience. So there was a particular concession right worth billions of dollars in this country, which required the ability to tier prioritization of access and give ruthless preemption to public safety in this country, for a nationwide public safety network. We patented that technology. We developed that technology. We demonstrated that technology because it was a requirement of the competitive process to do that. And we were up against one of the large telecom conglomerates in this country. They didn't have that technology. They didn't have that capability. But they got it anyway. They got the concession anyway. It was worth billions to them, and they're one of their a senior person involved in this operation on, I'll say, their side of the table, was giving a presentation at one point and described exactly how the process that they were operating worked, and they described our process. They didn't say it's Rivada's, but they described exactly our process. And our chief scientist was there, the guy that actually invented it.
Yeah.
And we have his name's on the patent, on the patent of this technology. And he went up to the guy and he said, this is our technology, which we demonstrated to you. He wasn't part of this carrier at the time. He was working for the government at the time. And it was a requirement that we demonstrated this technology to this particular part of the government because we had to show we could do it. So we did it. And we demonstrated it, and we showed them how. We showed them the lines of code. We actually put the equipment in their lab and ran it for them for a few days, with them taking notes, filming it, everything.
And if you were doing it to a private business, you'd be under all sorts of non-disclosure.
Correct. So this is what happened. So we demonstrated it as a requirement of the competitive process, and only one entity demonstrated that they could do that, because no one else could, because we had the technology. And so this is like, about a year and a half, maybe two, maybe more than 2 years later. So my chief scientist said, we demonstrated this to you. He was the guy. He was in the lab at the time. And he said, and now this carrier has this technology? And he said, well, yeah. He said, so we took it. So he said, what are you going to do about it? This is... Now,
it's thuggish behavior.
We're talking about here, this is something worthy, frankly, of a mafioso. And this is, and I've never spoken about this publicly before. And then you are left with a choice, which is, what do you do? Because every innovative company's got so much time and so many resources in how do you deploy it. You could ramp up and say, okay, I'm gonna fight them, because not only have they stolen our technology, not only can we see it working, they said they could do this, and the only way that they could do it when they said it at the time to win the concession instead of us and get this particular spectrum, they said they could do it knowing that the only way they could do it was if they stole our technology, which is exactly what they did. Now, to sue them and to sue something that big will cost us somewhere, probably, when all is said and done, between 10 and 15 to $20 million.
Right.
And the question is do I want to spend 10 to 20 million bucks doing that and spending X amount of my team's resources, time, and effort on doing that? Or do I just want to put it down to chalk it up to experience and move on to the next thing. And this story that I've just told you about is being repeated time and again in this economy. Had the patent been respected, had the requirement to be able to perform that capability by showing that you actually had the right to use that technology been in place, I can tell you that right now, US public safety would have a much better public safety communication system than it has today. It wouldn't be paying anything for it. Instead, it's paying billions of dollars to continue to have this service. It would be getting quote unquote free service because of what the technology is capable of doing in terms of offsetting use and bringing in additional income to subsidize, if you like, the public safety network. But not only that, American gigabit prices would be much lower than what they are today. And that's the result of just one example of the type of abuse that's going on, because these crony corporatists are completely fearless. They have defanged the patent system in this country.
Right.
They have captured it, and they are not afraid of it. So it's not just about the Chinese stealing technology, which they do with a gusto.
Right.
It's also about American crony corporatists weaponizing the system in their favor and using it against innovative, disruptive American companies who've got much, much better technologies, much, much better ways to really have a meaningful impact on the American economy, and stopping that from happening. That is going on right now.
It's just disgusting. And it isn't just the things that have happened through the America Invents Act. So you've got PTAB, that's a problem. Now it's first to file. But there's also, even if you went to court, you could go to court and you may not get injunctive relief. You would not get injunctive relief, especially on something like this, because what are they going to do? Shut down a public safety communication system? Of course they're not. And these guys know that, right? Right.
They know that. The whole the regulatory state is conditioned now to be hostile to innovation. Hostile. If you are not rolling in there and you are not one of maybe 50 companies across all sectors,
right?
It's like you're up against you have a much steeper hill to climb. Whereas if you were to look at those 50 companies, the number of them that are actually innovating themselves is almost zero. I can tell you in my sector, in the telecom sector, you look at the 3 top carriers in America, it's a cartel. Show me how many real patents they have filed in the course of the last 20 years. Right. They don't invent anything. Nothing.
We should have 5G operating here well. And
you can draw. I drove during the summer. I wanted to go and visit the Gettysburg battlefield. Mm-hmm. And I drove from DC to Gettysburg, and that's a pretty decent highway. The number of times where I had 0 bars of coverage of anything, of any G, it was just shocking.
Yes.
And then the prices that people pay for it.
Right.
It's shocking. So look, these are sort of small examples, if you like, of a bigger problem. But what I've just recounted to you is being repeated again and again and again and again. And I'm telling your listeners, this has real consequences for them in terms of what they're paying for goods and services, and it has real consequences for America, because in the case of wireless, the shift that would have come about had that patent been respected would have created a model for 5G in America that would have been copied around the rest of the world. And it wasn't changed. The model stayed what it was for 4G, which meant that Huawei and the Chinese government were able to go around, and because there wasn't a viable business model for 5G because it was locked in this this incorrect business model that it's exercising at the moment, Huawei were able to go around and effectively suborn the system by providing subsidized equipment to carriers that had no business model for 5G. This is how the People's Republic of China was able to advance its campaign to dominate the cyber domain globally. It's why most of Latin America has now gone Huawei for 5G. All of Africa is Huawei for 5G. A ton of Asia's Huawei for 5G. And they almost got most of Europe. Now, that's been rowed back a bit, but they even got Germany. These are real consequences.
Well, there are consequences. There's so many consequences. There's consequences to public safety from this particular example. There is a loss of innovation, because what happens for people who are not aware and are maybe listening to this for the first time, when you put a patent out there and the whole world sees it, then inventors can see that and innovate on top of it, and so no telling what else could have been created that we've lost.
Exactly right. And there is, of course, the disincentive to inventors. I'll tell you, I am much more reluctant now to invent than I was.
It costs money to research and develop something.
And you develop. It's like you're baking a cake. And, you've put hours and hours and hours into it, and a huge effort, and you've put it out on the window to cool, and someone comes along and steals it and eats it.
Yeah.
And it's like, why would you bake another one?
Yeah.
I mean, it's at some point you've got to stop feeding the thieves.
Right, exactly.
Right, and do something else.
And so you've got all of those, and then we've got the national security implications because of
which
China.
Are perhaps the gravest of all. They're the domino knock-on consequences of allowing this to continue has real consequences in the national security environment. China, it's not a secret. They have said they wanted they want to dominate the global cyber domain by 2025, not 2055, 2025.
There's just
around the corner.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a couple of more Christmases away.
Yes.
And now they've had some setbacks, but they're largely on track still. And they're largely on track because we keep doing stupid things and allowing crony corporatists to exercise a regulatory capture regime that has produced things like this warping of the patent system in America. Now, there are other things like that are going on in other areas because regulatory capture is endemic.
Right, it's everywhere.
But the patent system is a good example of one area where we can see real-world results.
And the opportunities that are lost are quite...
They're incalculable. Yeah. They're literally incalculable.
Right.
Because they look, we should already be at more than 100 connected devices per capita. We're not. What would all of those connected devices be doing? I can speculate what some of them will be doing. They'll be medical, public safety, industrial, agricultural, markets, financial services, etc. And you know what? There'll be a whole lot of other uses that I can't think of
that
right
someone
now.
else, it's not on the face of the earth yet. Someone has yet to invent it. But if it isn't even there for them to look at and go, oh, if I had this, I could do something more.
Exactly.
So what are for people who are listening, what would your calls to action be for them?
I think we need to go back to basics in terms of where the US patent system was rather than where it is. I think it has gone in reverse. I think that we're really shooting ourselves in the foot with the new regime. I think that needs to be fixed and very, very urgently. I think we also need to take a much deeper look at regulatory capture and the crony corporatism. And what it is doing to our economic well-being. You want to talk about an ecosystem that has been massively distorted. It's the economic ecosystem driven by regulatory capture and crony corporatism. We have to root it out. The useful thing about your communists and anarchists and everything else, they identify themselves. Crony corporatists sound like us. They actually use the same terminology. I've heard them talking about things like nationalization and using it in a term, saying the word nationalization because they know it's got negative connotations. But what they were talking about was exactly the opposite. So it's the weaponization of language,
right,
where they were saying something is nationalization that was actually privatization. And we see this through politics. We see it through this crony corporatism and regulatory capture has weaponized the legal system. It's even weaponized the language, where something like nationalization means, or at least as it was being deployed here in the last couple of years, means exactly the opposite of what it meant in 1987.
Right. Okay. Is there anything else that you want to cover before we close out the podcast?
I just want to congratulate you on what I think is an excellent product. I think it's a very, very important message that this gets out to Americans, and that they understand that it is down to them to make a difference, that you have to act. You have to pick up the phone and you have to call your congressperson, you have to call your senators, your state senators, and raise your concern about crony corporatism, about regulatory capture, about the fact that it's costing your family more money, and even more importantly, that it is holding back America from being able to exercise its full potential. Let's get these chains off America so America can go back to being realizing its full potential.
Very good. Excellent. So thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who's listening. This has been another podcast about the movie Innovation Race. I'm Jenny Beth Martin with Tea Party Patriots Action and executive producer of Innovation Race. Innovation Race is available to watch on salemnow.com. So please visit salemnow.com and share the movie with your friends so all Americans can learn about how important innovation is to our economy and our national security.
The Innovation Race podcast is hosted by Jenny Beth Martin and produced by Kevin Mooneyhan, Lori Heiselman, and Andy Peterson. Luke Livingston directs the video podcast. Innovation Race podcast is a production of Tea Party Patriots Action. For more information, visit teapartypatriots.org. That's teapartypatriots.org.